Hey there, everybody. Mike Robbins here, coming to you live. It's a little before 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 23rd of March, as I'm doing this live on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. Today and this week is very exciting because the paperback of my latest book, We're All in This Together, is out and available, and I'm excited about it. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but more specifically about some things that I've learned since the book initially came out a couple of years ago and what we've learned about life and work and teamwork over the last few years. And then I'm going to talk specifically about a couple of the pillars in the book that I think you might find useful. So if you're joining live, either on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, feel free to just chime in the comments. Let me know where you are. Hey, Ray, nice to see you. Hope things are good in Scotland. Thanks for joining on Facebook. If you're watching the video of this after, you can also chime in with a question or a comment or reflections. I'm going to put a couple links in the comments after I'm done recording this, but one of them I just want to tell you about is if you go to mike-robbins.com, which is our website, mike-robbins.com/together. That's the special landing page we put together for the book. You can find out more about the book and you can order copies for yourself, for your team. And there's also some really cool bonus material that you'll get when you go to that page and order the book there. You can get it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever bookseller you choose, but you come back there and just enter your info in, and then it'll take you to a page where you'll get access to a webinar that I did a while back when the book first came out, access to a specific and exclusive audio series that goes along as a companion with the book, and then action guides for leaders, team members, and for teams. All of this is free when you order the book, and so check that out. I also want to mention that we are having a live in-person event here in the Bay Area on Saturday, this Saturday, the 26th, March 26th, at 4 o'clock at Book Passage in Corte Madera, which is here in Marin County where we live. So if you do live locally or you know people that live locally, please come, invite others. The event is free. I'm going to give a talk, sign some books, answer some questions, and it'll be fun. We'll have a cake too. So I'll put a link to that in the comments as well. So look, I've talked a lot about this when I've come live. I've talked about this on my podcast. I mean, my book, We're All in This Together, originally came out in the spring of 2020, right as we were getting into the throes of COVID. And I didn't write it with COVID in mind, but the title, We're All in This Together, was something that was kind of like a rallying cry or a catchphrase, at least in those first few months of the pandemic. And I wrote a bit about this in the new paperback edition. I wrote a preface. It's like a 2,500 word preface. And it really was some of my thoughts and reflections on what I've learned through my own personal experience, as well as working with a lot of people, leaders, and teams, and my research over the last couple of years as we've been going through this pandemic as it relates to life, work, teamwork. So I wanted to reflect on that because, again, it was kind of this surreal experience to have written this book with this title that was so resonant and relevant to what was happening. But then the book itself, well, I think resonant and relevant, wasn't written for people going through a global pandemic and having to figure out how to work and live and navigate all of that. So, again, as I've shared here before, the question that I got a lot in the early months when the book first came out in hardcover back in 2020, that spring, was, are we really all in this together? Because, I was hearing this from leaders who were really struggling, having to make hard decisions about layoffs and furloughs and the future of their team and their businesses, and not really sure how's this all going to work. And there were definitely winners and losers. There still are in the economy, but it seemed like, again, if you worked for a brick and mortar type business, like, wow, the stores were closed. We couldn't go anywhere and do anything. If you worked for, a grocery store or a tech company or a streaming service or something, like, your business was booming. So it just felt like there was haves and have-nots and winners and losers. And there was that. And then a few months into the pandemic, of course, we had the tragic murder of George Floyd, which sparked outrage and grief and all of what it sparked, in addition to protests and demonstrations and a uprising, the likes of which I'd never seen. And a lot of conversations and a lot of focus on race and gender and orientation and diversity and equity and inclusion in general, but also specifically in the workplace, which one of the reasons I wrote We're All in This Together, and one of the four pillars is really about inclusion and belonging. So wanting to be more directly engaged in that work with my work and with my life, then I was hearing from a lot of people, particularly people who don't look like me, saying, we're not really all in this together, Mike. This is showing us the pandemic and a lot of what we're now seeing with respect to social inequality and um, just systemic racism. So I've been grappling with this question of, are we really all in this together, for the last couple of years? And the truth is, I think the answer is yes and no at the same time. I think what's more accurate, another analogy you've probably heard me say here before, is we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats, which is always true, but I think it's been increasingly true over the course of the last couple of years. And I think it's important for us to remember that as we move forward. Now, I don't think we're quite yet in a post-COVID world, although it's easy to think that. And depending on where you live in the world, restrictions are lifting and case numbers are coming down. But I mean, if you're in Asia or Europe right now, or I was just reading a story in our local paper this morning, we still get the physical paper, the Marin IJ, that, the local officials here are monitoring the situation and feeling like we're at a lull. We're not down as low as we were pre-Delta and pre-Omicron, but lower than we were obviously just a few months ago with respect to COVID. But it seems like it's possible that might be on the rise. So anyway, I'm not predicting that. I am not a public health expert or an epidemiologist or anybody. I've gotten out of the prediction business as it relates to COVID. But I think that the pillars of my book, We're All in This Together, and some of the context and insight that I've gained over the last couple of years, I think is really important right now. Because look, I think it's been both more challenging and more important than ever for us to figure out how to stay connected and engaged with each other through all of this. And look, most of us are tired, we're weary, we're burnt. So, Hamish, good to see you. I hope things are good in New Zealand, where you are. Scotland's high at the moment, right, Ray? I hope you're staying safe and healthy, you and your family and everyone close to you. So, what's happening in Scotland is different than what's happening in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I want to talk about the four pillars of the book, which, you've probably heard me talk about before, but just to see how these resonate with you right now, and then look at some of the paradoxes of them in this context of all of us being in it together or not. But pillar number one is creating psychological safety. So what is that? That's basically group trust. It means the group is safe enough for what? For taking risks, for making mistakes, for even failing, for speaking up, for engaging in healthy conflict. Knowing I can do that, I can dissent from the group, I can disagree, and I won't be shamed, ridiculed, kicked out of the group for simply just having a different opinion or taking a risk or making a mistake. I was talking earlier today to one of our clients. I'm going to do a virtual keynote for an event they're having for their whole 7,000 person global team in a couple of weeks. And they were talking about one of the things they're going to do at their event is have 10 of their people tell failure stories where they failed, where they screwed up, where things didn't go well, either personally or professionally. And I loved, and I said, well, tell me why you're doing that. And they're like, well, one of our core values is courage. We also believe in embracing vulnerability, and we want to give people the permission to just talk about failures because that's an important part. And I totally agree. So one of the ways that we create more psychological safety is we make it okay to fail. We make it okay to struggle. We make it okay to ask for help. We make it okay for a lot of things. We also make it okay for people to not be okay. People are struggling with their mental health, with their family, with lots of things. So again, not like an excuse, but just like let's create more space so that people feel like they can show up and be themselves. The second pillar in the book, which I alluded to earlier, is to focus on inclusion and belonging. And now one of the things that I found as I was researching and writing We're All in This Together is just I was humbled, and I've been humbled over the last few years. I mean, I'm someone, I'm white, I'm straight, I'm male, I'm cisgendered, I'm American. I have all of these privileges, some of which I'm aware of, some of which I'm not as conscious of. But growing up with a single mom, with not a lot of money, in a pretty diverse place in Oakland, California, just across the bridge where I still live now with my family, not often being in the majority racially, especially by the time I got to junior high and high school. Um, that had an impact on me. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be Black or be Asian or Latino. I don't know what it's like to be female or gay or transgender. I don't know what it's like to be anything but me, which again is now a 48-year-old straight white man from um, California, doing what I do. So I am much more aware of my privilege than I was even just a few years ago when it first was brought up to me. Because thinking about my life and my background and my journey, it didn't seem like privilege. I thought meant you were like a Rockefeller or something. But I realized that privilege, we all have privilege, actually. Some of us have more than others, and most of our privilege is invisible to us. And so part of creating more inclusion within a team, within a structure, within a society is those of us who have privilege doing anything and everything we can to include and empower those that have less privilege. That said, it's not the ultimate goal. Creating a diverse team is important. We know that diverse teams perform at a higher level than non-diverse teams. McKinsey had a study called Delivering Through Diversity a few years ago that said racially diverse teams were 33% more effective and productive in terms of bottom line results than non-racially diverse teams. Gender diverse teams were 21% more effective, more productive in their bottom line results than non-gender diverse teams. So it matters in terms of performance and results, and it's also important on so many levels, and not just diversity around gender and race, but age and orientation, but also just diversity of thought, diversity of skill, diversity of background, of worldview, whatever. But there's diversity, which is important, and some of us can impact the diversity of the team more than others based on our position and are we involved in and responsible for hiring and who gets on the team and not. Inclusion is something we all can participate in to some degree, but especially those of us with more privilege or more positional power or leverage. But I was talking to Eric Severson, who's the chief people officer at Neiman Marcus, on my podcast. I've actually had him on the show twice. He's someone I've known for years and I really respect. He used to be the chief people officer at Gap, which is where I met him and partnered with him for a number of years. But Eric is white. He's male. He's American, but he happens to be a member of the LGBTQ community and someone who's been an advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging throughout his career. And he said something really simple but profound to me when we were talking. He said, Mike, look, I think if you talk to most of us, and he's like, I can't speak on behalf of all of us, but most of us who self-identify as being a member of one or more non-dominant groups, like I do, he said, and you ask us, would you rather be included than excluded? I think most of us would say, yeah, sure. I'd rather be included than excluded. He said, but that still sets up a dynamic where the in-group, those in power, are inviting the out-group, those with less power, into the group. And while there's some reality to that in the society in which we live, at work and just in life, he said, I think most of us just want to know that we belong here, in this family, in this community, on this team, in this organization, whatever the case may be. And when you think about it, belonging is actually part of Maslow's hierarchy, right? It's physiological and safety needs are the first two, then belonging, love, connection is the third hierarchy, or third need on the hierarchy, I should say. And then comes esteem, and then comes self-actualization when you think about what Maslow taught us all. And so belonging is a fundamental human need. Whatever our race, whatever our gender, whatever our orientation, whatever our background, and whatever our age, whatever position we may hold, we all have a need to belong. So it's really important, and we got to be able to engage in conversations about some of these topics that may be uncomfortable. And those of us who look like me, who often say, why does everything have to be about race? Or why do we always, I don't want to talk about that. It's uncomfortable. It makes me feel bad, or I put my foot in my mouth, or I might say the wrong thing or offend someone. It's like, I get it. I experience all of that myself. And you know what? Being able to opt out of those conversations is the definition of privilege. I don't want to talk about that. It makes me uncomfortable. I'm not sure what to say. So great teams, great communities, strong groups are able and willing to engage in those conversations and do whatever they can to not only include people, but really create that sense of authentic belonging. So those are the first two pillars. The first one is psychological safety. The second one is focusing on inclusion and belonging. Thanks, Mary. It is a subtle but really vital distinction between inclusion and belonging. They're both important, right? It's like I make the distinction between recognition and appreciation in my work, which I'll talk about in a minute, but they're both important. They're just different. So we want to understand the differences, the subtleties, and the difference. So the third pillar is kind of related. Each of these pillars sort of build on each other, by the way. We got to have psychological safety first and foremost so that we can create inclusion and belonging. And doing that, or one way to do that, or what's necessary, is then we're able to, pillar number three, have or embrace what I call sweaty palm conversations. Sweaty palm conversations. This comes from a conversation I had with a mentor of mine years ago. He said, Mike, what stands between you and the kind of relationships you really want to have with people is usually a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation you're too afraid to have. He said, if you get good at those 10-minute sweaty palm conversations, you'll have fantastic relationships. You'll build trust, you'll resolve conflict, you'll get to know people who are different, you'll work stuff out, you'll talk about the elephant in the room, you'll give feedback, you'll get feedback. But if you do like most of us and you avoid those conversations because they can be awkward or uncomfortable, or you put your foot in your mouth, or you don't know what to say, or you unintentionally offend someone, or whatever it is, he said, then you end up being a victim of who you work with, who you live with. He said, but if you embrace those conversations, lean into the discomfort of them, have them sooner rather than later, then you can build fantastic relationships filled with trust and authenticity and connection. Now, look, I don't love having those conversations any more than the next person. They're not my favorite. They're just important. They're necessary. And think of, over the course of COVID, how many sweaty palm conversations we've had to have with our family, with our team, with people in our community, with all the things that have been happening in the country and in the world over these last few years, even pre-COVID. Whew. So our ability to have those conversations and creating an environment within the team where we can talk about hard things. Great teams talk to each other, not about each other. We embrace that discomfort. So, we're talking here about my most recent book, We're All in This Together, which just came out in paperback yesterday, but this is really a life thing. This is really just a human thing that's not easy, but is important. And the more we do that with people, the easier it gets, though, the more we build the muscle. What are some things you find that are challenging about any of what I'm talking about, either psychological safety or inclusion and belonging, or even the sweaty palm conversations? Feel free to, I'm appreciating the comments and chat, but if you're joining live, or even if you're watching the video of this after, if you have questions or comments or reflections or disagreements or anything about these ideas, as well as how they relate to what's going on right now. I mean, the fourth and final pillar in the book is care about and challenge each other. So here's what I've learned working with teams of different types and different sizes in different industries over the last 20 plus years. There's two primary things that drive performance of a team. And this could also even be within a family or a church group or a community or any group, even a relationship. First, there has to be a high level of expectation that's healthy, that's clear. So it's a high bar, but it's healthy, it's clear, meaning it's not perfection, it's not ambiguous, it's really clear. This is what great looks like. This is what I expect. This is what I expect from you, from me, from us, right? So that's there. It's got to be clear. It's got to be healthy. Again, if it's perfection, then everybody's going to fall short and fail. If it's overly critical, if it's constantly driving and pushing, and everyone's going to be exhausted and burnt out and worn out. But a healthy high bar coupled with a high level of caring and nurturing. So we expect a lot and we care a lot of others, of ourselves, of the team, all at the same time. And we do this in abundance. It's very difficult to over-care about people. Now, some of us are more comfortable with the caring and nurturing just based on our personality, our style. Some of us are more comfortable with the, high bar and sort of pushing, driving a little bit of performance, if you will. It's about doing both of these things simultaneously. And, I was talking on my podcast a few years back to my former baseball coach at Stanford, Dean Stotts, who I love and is a dear friend and mentor. And I've been close with him ever since I was in college and played for him. And he said, Mike, he coached at Stanford for 37 years. He since has retired, had a ton of success. But he said, my philosophy for coaching was simple. It was this. He said, I always knew that I had to love you hard so I could push you hard. And I said, really, Dean? Tell me more about that. He said, I knew that if I was going to get the most out of you, Mike, or any of my players individually and all the teams I coached, the first thing I had to do was establish that I loved and cared about you as a human being, as a person. And if you genuinely felt that and knew that and got that, then you would give me permission either explicitly or implicitly, to push you as hard as I needed to push you to get the most out of you, to have you perform at the highest level. And look, he was saying that in the context of coaching baseball, college baseball, but I think that's true for coaching anyone, for leading, for managing, for creating that kind of environment. And when you can create a team environment where people feel safe enough, they feel included, they feel like they belong, they're empowered to have those sweaty palm conversations, then we can really challenge each other, push each other in a healthy way, while at the same time nurturing each other so that we can all perform at our best. Which, if you think about the best teams you've ever been a part of, that's usually been there to some degree, right? So before I wrap up, I have a few other thoughts and a couple other announcements and requests I'd love to make of you, but I'm just curious if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments about what I'm talking about. Again, if you're joining live, I can respond in real time. If you're watching the video of this after, I will check out the comments later and can respond in text. I'm really, really excited about the paperback version of this book. Oops, I'm dropping things here. This book means a lot to me, as all my books do. But this one in particular, it just feels important. When I wrote it, it felt important. When it came out, it felt important. It feels important now, given what's going on, the title, the content of the book, but the preface specifically sort of, I feel like it's one of the most important things that I've written in all my years of writing, both books and articles and everything else. So I have one final just story that I want to close with that you may have heard me share before, but it really kind of epitomizes the work and what we talked about here today. But I do want to make a couple of announcements and requests if I can. And if you watch the video all the way through, either live or to this point, I'm assuming you have some interest in my work and this discussion. So I appreciate that. The first thing is the book, the paperback's available, as I mentioned at the beginning. You can go to mike-robbins.com/together. I'll make sure that link is in the comments when I get done here. And from that place, you can order the book from Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever, and then you get access to these great free bonus material that we put together. There's a webinar, there's an audio series, and there's some action guides. So check that out. The name of the book, Maureen, is We're All in This Together. The subtitle is Creating a Team Culture of High Performance, Trust, and Belonging. And it is just out today, or yesterday, I should say, this week in paperback. So it's even cheaper, by the way, and there's a new preface up front. The second request that I have, or announcement, is, again, we're having an in-person launch event for the book. We weren't able to do that when the book first came out in 2020 because of COVID, but we can get together safely, at least for the time being. And it's on Saturday, this Saturday, March 26th at 4 p.m. here in California, in a town called Corte Madera, California, which is right here in Marin County. It's at a store called Book Passage. It's a great independent bookstore. I've done events for all my books there. It's going to be fun. I'll give a talk. I'll sign some books. I'll answer some questions. We'll even have a cake that looks like the book. So come join us. Everyone is welcome. It's free. We'll have some fun. And then the third request that I have, I'll put a link, by the way, to the info about the Book Passage event in the comments. I'm going to put a third link directly to Amazon, because you can get the book there if you want. But if you've already got the book, either you got the hardcover or you've already purchased the paperback, what I would really love and would be helpful to me and to our team is if you left a review on Amazon, because that's how people find out about the book. And that tends to be the place that most people buy books these days, at least here in the US and in North America. So anyway, those are the three links to the launch page about the book, to the Book Passage event that we're having on Saturday, and to Amazon. So check those out. Thank you for watching, for listening. And my final story is this, and maybe you've heard me tell this story. It's the Oprah Winfrey story. I heard Oprah speak a few years ago, and she said something simple but profound. She said, I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people in my career, everybody, right? Presidents, prime ministers, celebrities, children, people who've gone through tragedies, people who've been incarcerated. You name the type of person, Oprah said, I've interviewed them. She said, after all these years and all these interviews, do you know that just about every single person I've ever interviewed asks me some version of the same question when the interview's over? The camera shuts off, they lean over and they say, how'd I do? Or was that okay? And, early in my career, she said, I used to be really confused by this question because I'd be sitting across from someone who's very successful, very accomplished. And I'd be wondering to myself, are they really that insecure? Do they really need my validation? What is that? Why are they asking me that? She goes, then I finally realized something. They're not actually asking for my validation. You know what they're really asking me? Did you see me? Did you hear me? Did what I say matter? She said, and I agree with her, everybody's asking those questions all the time. And if we can be the kind of people within our work, within our lives, within our teams, within our families, who can show up in the midst of the stress, the challenge, the uncertainty, within everything that's going on these days, especially, and see people and hear people and let them know they matter. That's how we really embody this sense of being in it together. So thanks for joining. Mary, thanks for your comments and questions and all your support. And all of you, really appreciate it. And I'll look forward to seeing you again here live. Take care. Check out the book. All right. Bye-bye.